Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 5, Head On. In this episode, Lois has her second round of chemo. This is 3 weeks after the previous episode. Jordan has grown tired of Candice always being in the bathroom and using all the hot water. Frankly, I can't say that I blame him. I would probably feel the same way. General Lane and Natalie are going riding on a pair of ATVs. There is a school dance that evening. This episode all takes place in the span of probably about 24 hours, one whole day, and the next morning. Lois's dad isn't happy about Lois getting her treatment at Mannheim's medical center. He thinks Lois should be concentrating on beating the cancer and not chasing after Mannheim. I don't disagree with his reasoning. However, I can also see Lois's point. She is a driven woman. She has to stay busy. For someone like Lois, she's not going to just sit back while Mannheim is a direct threat to her family. She has an in and she's going to use it. Her motivation there is very, very clear. While getting her chemo, Lois sneaks off to snoop, leaving Clark to talk to the other women there for their chemotherapy. There was a lot of exposition in Clark's scene while the two women told him about their experiences with their cancer. Lois gets caught snooping by Mannheim. This was actually a really good scene. Mannheim tells her about his experience growing up in a neighborhood where people got sick and didn't know why, and that unbeknownst to them, their neighborhood was right next to an old chemical waste dump. I really wished that they hadn't exposed Mannheim's malfeasance earlier in the season. I wish they'd just let us get to know him. It was after his mother died of cancer that Mannheim realized that no one was coming to save them. He was going to have to do this himself. And that was his motivation for building the cancer center and everything else he's done for his community. And it's just a shame because he has so much potential to be a very sympathetic character. I really wish that they'd shown that to us earlier, just him as this guy who came from a place where people had been treated very poorly. I wish they'd given us his motivation earlier, allowed us to connect with him before showing him to be this horrible bad guy.
They tried to do that when that judge was going to jump off the building in like episode 2, and she was trying to explain how people like her didn't get into positions, but they never really made a theme of this. And then Mannheim was talking to Superman when he visited earlier in the season about, I notice you don't save people around here. They could have done something with this, but it's been sprinkled like very, very lightly all over the place. In fact, I would argue that's kind of what they do in general with this series this season, is I think there's lots of good ideas, but it's all over the place.
Yeah. Plus, I wish they would be a little bit more realistic about how they're presenting some of this stuff. Because in that episode with the judge, it really felt like they were trying to turn this into some sort of problem that's exclusive to the inner city. As we all know from what we've seen in East Palestine, Ohio, and a number of other places in the United States, EPA Superfund sites that are very detrimental to the health of the people living on top of them or next to them. You know, even with the original Superfund site, because I actually looked into this, the very first one was in Love Canal, New York. And when you read about this, the government wasn't going to do anything. It was activists from that community who had had enough of kids being stillborn, all sorts of horrible birth defects, people getting horrible cancers and everything. This isn't an isolated incident. I mean, what happened was the area had been a toxic waste dump. From what I can tell, the chemical company had sold the property to the town to build a school on for something like $1. I mean, it was ridiculous. So this chemical company, they knew it was under the ground. They did it anyway, and people got sick and they died, and it was horrible. You know, we see this repeated over and over again throughout this country, and frankly, I mean, I'm glad that they're finally at least drawing some attention to this, but I really wish that they had done it in a way that, I mean, I don't know, maybe it would have been too heavy-handed if they'd been more realistic about how many Superfund sites and brownfields we have in this country. I know that this is a bigger problem than just Mannheim in this show. I don't know. I guess I'm having a hard time expressing how I wish they had done this. I mean, I'm glad they did it at all, but it just seems like you said, like they have a lot of really good ideas, but they tend to just do a very superficial job of covering them.
In season 1, with Morgan Edge and him revitalizing that mine, and there were toxic side effects to that, they covered the same type of thing in a little bit more allegory than what Mannheim is doing right now. There's little things like this that, and maybe it's just because it's on the CW or HBO Max. HBO Max, I would kind of expect them to have a little bit more latitude since they were funding this series. But there's a lot they could have done with this series to make it stand out over those disposable CW Arrowverse shows. And in some places they kind of did, but they never really got any momentum to like do anything with it. It's just drop a few messages and move on. But at least they dropped a few messages, which is more than a lot of other shows are doing. So at least they dropped a few messages, and then unfortunately they moved on and didn't actually cover it in a way that mattered. But that could just be Hollywood right now and the way corporations are controlling everything from our media to our news. Well, media meaning entertainment, our news. They seem to be covering everything. So maybe this is the best they can do, because I agree with you. I think that Mannheim conversation with her, I was actually not expecting it to be that good. I was getting ready to roll my eyes because just the way Lois was caught snooping around that office, I was like, oh gosh. But that actually was an interesting conversation, and I was surprised because I wasn't expecting that. And the conversation that Clark was having with those cancer patients, I was expecting to roll my eyes at that too, but I thought those conversations were good too. There was some good stuff in here. It's a pity it's just onesie-twosie sprinkled in, and then a bunch of other stuff is put around it.
I guess a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, especially when just about every ad that we see during the ad breaks is for some other drug. I mean, it's like pharmaceuticals galore. I guess, yay that they managed to slip this in at all, but boo that it's surrounded by pharmaceutical ads. Yeah, but that's what I've come to expect. We've been seeing that during every episode, is that it's pretty much wall to wall, here's this drug, here's all the horrible side effects. Boy, is that a turnoff. Anyway, Mannheim tells Lois that he's going to send her all of Dr. Hook's research so that she can go through it. I wish that we hadn't been shown earlier in the episode that other inmate that he'd gotten out of prison, that DiStefano, however you pronounce that guy's name. So we know that he's still doing nefarious things with Superman's blood. It's really a shame. I wish they'd just shown him to be more sympathetic until they just exposed him for being the nefarious guy that he is.
Well, even at the end of this episode, which I'm not going to spoil, but it's very clear he's up to bad stuff.
Yeah, we'll get there in the end. Natalie and General Lane, they go riding. It was a really nice scene, watching them growing closer. When they get back to the farm, the General is not happy because Jordan has come back from town and he has brought Mateo, the guy from the party, with him. I guess Sarah had told Mateo where to find Natalie. Mateo is there to ask her out, and the General gives Jordan an earful because it's a security risk, picking this guy up in town and bringing him back to the farm. And I really hope that the General's fears aren't realized, because I'd really like Natalie to just be able to have something normal in her childhood, especially considering what she's been through already coming from the other universe. Mateo is going to go out and buy some formal wear so that they can go to the dance together that night.
That scene where Mateo and Natalie, when basically Jordan said, "Look who I found," and they were talking, and then Mateo was like, "What's up with that guy? He's making me nervous." And Sam Lane was inside the house with his nose up against the window. That was actually funny, because he was like some overprotective, grandfather, I guess in this case, surrogate grandfather. But it was funny because they kept showing his face pushed up against the wall or the window with like a frowny face on him. So that was actually funny.
Yeah, the chemistry that General Lane and Natalie have, those two actors, they do a great job together. There are a number of actors in this show that it's just a joy watching them interact because they are just really that good. Their chemistry just clicks so well.
I hope the actress who plays Natalie goes on to do other things because she puts some charisma into her acting, and I think she could become something bigger than this TV show if she gets some opportunities. So I'm hoping maybe she has a future career in something bigger.
Just not before the show ends.
Yeah.
Jonathan and Candice are out in Jonathan's truck. They come upon Kyle on the side of the road changing a tire on his truck. Kyle tells Jonathan that a bunch of people have driven by, but Jonathan is the first one to stop. This leads Kyle to ask Jonathan if he had any interest in volunteering with the fire department and learning to be a firefighter. I thought this was a really well done scene. Growing up in a small town, obviously you're going to have some sort of fire department. Ours was a volunteer fire department. Guys of a certain age were expected to learn to be volunteer firemen. It was nice that they included that in this show, that Kyle is the fire chief. It was nice seeing Jonathan embracing that role in the small town.
I thought that was interesting, too, because this series with the two sons is concentrating on Jordan, the one with the abilities. Jonathan is kind of left off to the side. It kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes because in a family dynamic like that, I could see with Jonathan, he would start to build up this animosity with his brother getting all this attention. In season 1, they had the little bit beginnings of Jonathan doing research with his mom when they were looking up John Henry and what was going on there. And that's where I thought this series was going, was Jordan was going to be mentored by his dad and Jonathan was going to be mentored by his mother. But they just kind of stopped with that. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but this opportunity to be a firefighter to help people, I'd like to think that that's maybe something inside of Jonathan, that obviously that's what his dad does for a living, and that's what his brother is trying to learn how to do with his ability. Jonathan doesn't have any super abilities, so they didn't do much with the Lois mentoring, so maybe this will go down a path where Jonathan can channel that I want to help people too into a constructive way. I might be hoping for something that doesn't happen. The writers may not have this plan for him, but if they don't, Jonathan is getting ripped off here because I've been wanting a story with this new Jonathan. This could be the story for the new Jonathan. Plus, it would allow Jonathan's character to channel his want to help people just like his father and brother do. So I'm hoping maybe they do this constructively and don't turn this into some sort of crap show.
Yeah, that's my hope as well. Jonathan agrees to help out at the fire department on the weekends because he works at the store during the week. This will come into play later on in the episode, but I'll get to that when we get to that. Lana was having lunch at the diner with Sarah when the former mayor's son, Junior, comes over and starts giving Lana a hard time. He's accusing her of cheating to beat his dad in the mayoral race. And this was not a good scene. He was very nasty to Lana and to Sarah, even though he and Sarah used to be friends. Lana sees Chrissy after this incident, and she's supposed to be making a statement to the newspaper about the construction delay on the new town hall. Chrissy tells Lana that people have been saying a lot of the things that Junior said to her back at the diner. Lana considers going public with all the corruption she's discovered since she took over as mayor. At the dance, Natalie and Mateo have an awkward moment when Mateo tries to kiss Natalie and she pulls away and runs outside, which leads to a nice scene between Natalie and the general. And at the end of the scene, she actually hugs him and calls him Grandpa, which makes perfect sense to me. I've been waiting for this to happen. Even though he's not her grandfather, she's not of this universe. She's of the other one, and there was no Natalie in this universe. As far as I'm concerned, she has Lois's DNA in her, therefore she has General Lane's DNA in her, regardless of what universe she came from. There was that family connection. The General seems like he's the type of guy that he would be more than happy to take on more grandchildren. And it was really nice seeing them grow closer because, again, I really like the chemistry between these two.
Yeah, I'm hoping that goes somewhere too, because the General, not only did he have a failed marriage, but you could argue the relationship he has with both of his daughters didn't go well. Even with Lois, it's an okay relationship, but I wouldn't say it's the strongest relationship for him. And he even admitted that he didn't do great as a father. So this could be an opportunity with Natalie to kind of have a surrogate, I guess, third chance at getting this right with a daughter-like figure. So I'm hoping, again, they do something positive here, and we'll see where this goes. So far, so good, though.
Yeah, after the talk, Natalie goes back into the dance. It's clear that there's something worth exploring between them. We'll see where things go for Natalie. I really hope that they don't make him into a bad guy. I really, really hope they don't do that. Candice gets a call from her aunt in Topeka, and her aunt is willing to have Candice move in with her. Problem is, this is 4 hours away from Smallville. Jonathan thinks they can still see each other on weekends. He tries to change his fire department volunteer plans with Kyle. Kyle basically tells Jonathan that he has to decide what's more important to him, having his weekends free or learning the trade at the fire department. And I can kind of see where Kyle is coming from on that. Jonathan, when you're a teenager, I guess that's when you really start to understand that life is full of choices and they're not always pleasant or fair. Plus, I just felt that it was really unrealistic to think that he was going to be driving 4 hours each way to go visit Candice on the weekends. That was just really, really ridiculous. He just got his driver's license. A 16-year-old driving 4 hours each way every weekend. I don't see that as feasible.
Well, plus that Lois and Clark would have been okay with that.
Yeah, that's just no. As it is, well, I'll just say it now. I mean, at the end of the episode, Jonathan drives Candice to Topeka anyways, 4 hours each way. With a new driver like that, there's just no way in hell. If I was his mother, I would be like, no, I don't think so. Lana was at the dance on stage speaking, and she said something about life returning to normal. Junior got upset and ran out, which is understandable because for him, things aren't going to be going back to normal. His dad is dead, and there is no coming back from that. Everything is going to be different from here on out. Sarah runs after him, and outside, she holds Junior while he cries. He apologizes for what he said at the diner. Sarah tells him that she would like to try being friends again. This was a nice moment between Sarah and Junior. However, I must say, Junior does not look like he's high school aged. I don't know how old the actor is, but he looks like he's probably close to 30. He does not look like a kid. But even so, he and Sarah, they're sharing a flask sitting on the tailgate of a truck. And of course, this is when Lana comes in and catches them. Sarah does explain to her mother, and her mother actually was really cool about accepting the explanation. However, I really hope that Lana realizes that Sarah is really on the precipice of something bad here. That girl is spinning out of control. And if you add alcohol on top of everything else, along with her medication that she's already on, this is a recipe for disaster. At the dance, Chrissy and Kyle, it's clear that they're growing closer. It's funny because Chrissy is clearly more uncomfortable about the Lana situation than Kyle is. Chrissy spends the night at Kyle's, and in the morning she gets a text from Lana, and Lana wants to meet with her. And Chrissy's very nervous about this because I'm sure she was assuming it was about Kyle. And it's clear to me Chrissy and Kyle, they need to tell Lana, or Chrissy needs to tell Lana, because Chrissy's not going to be comfortable with this until it's out in the open. Lana tells Chrissy that she wanted to meet with her because she does not want to expose the former mayor's misdeeds, that she's going to name the new town hall after the former mayor, which was obviously a huge relief for Chrissy. Definitely the right thing to do. So, I mean, that's one of the things I like about this show is that the characters are, in general, decent people when it comes down to it, just that they have different motivations for doing things that sometimes come into conflict. Obviously, in a few other episodes, they have shown characters that I did not feel were given a fair shake. But in this particular episode, I didn't see any of that. Lois is desperately trying to get ready to go to the dance, but Clark is trying to convince her to stay home and rest. Mannheim's latest project breaks into the DoD, and Clark has to leave. Superman fights this Dystopia guy, and it seems like everyone has kryptonite now. I guess Mannheim just has a stockpile of the stuff, but it seems like every time Superman fights somebody, they have freaking kryptonite with them.
Yeah, I don't know if they have I think he had a dagger made of kryptonite, and it was, did you go to Walmart and pick up one? And later, Sam Lane said he called this person Deadline, so I'm guessing this villain is Deadline, as in like a newspaper deadline, so I guess that's what Sam Lane called him. And yeah, everybody has kryptonite. Now, I understand if you have a character like Superman, that giving you a foe that has any sort of chance of beating him, you are limited in what you can do. But still, I mean, how much kryptonite is all over the place?
Plus, this Dystopia or Deadline, he had superpowers of a sort because he'd been injected with Superman's blood formula that Mannheim has been working on.
Yeah, he could phase out of reality. So when Superman tried to punch him, he would just go right through him. So that was an effective weapon. I agree. You didn't necessarily need the kryptonite dagger to do anything because this guy couldn't be touched, which added a downfall because the way he was defeated actually made some sort of sense because as this guy was phasing out, Clark was getting hit by these daggers. So at the time when he was being stabbed, clearly this thing was in phase. Otherwise, how could he hit Clark? And Clark used that to his advantage in a counter move, which I thought actually showed some intelligence for how to defeat this thing. The guy was stabbing him, and Clark figured out that the only time he could touch this guy was right before he got stabbed. So as this guy was lunging toward him with the daggers, Clark grabbed his hand, pushed him back, and then kind of did what I think we both call the Hulk clap, where he clapped his hands, Superman clapped his hands really hard, and the concussion threw him Deadline into the vault wall, but I guess he was still partially phased because when you saw him again, he was inside the vault wall with just his head and arm kind of sticking out of it. Or I guess it was more than just his head and arm, but his arm was definitely his shoulder and that was stuck in there. He rephased inside the wall, so that was kind of I don't want to say gruesome, but it was not pleasant looking.
Yeah. If you were there in person, that would probably be very gruesome.
I didn't understand the technology being used, though, because the assumption I made when Superman came into the vault was somebody attached like a USB drive and was copying data off. Okay. And there was like a percentage ticker going on how much was being copied off. Okay. But after Superman defeated Deadline said, "It's too late, Superman," and it was at 100%. And I'm like, well, isn't that just a drive? Can't Superman just take the drive out and burn it with his heat vision? I'm guessing we're supposed to assume it was radio transmitting this data somewhere, but they were in a vault with big, thick doors and a wall, so how is a signal getting through that vault? I just didn't understand that. I know it's a superhero show, but I still like to have some sense of plausibility, and I didn't understand how that was supposed to work.
Yeah, that was a little bit, but yeah, again, superhero show, so I'll just let that go. Mannheim was doing this so that he could get information. We find out that he was trying to locate Bizarro's body, and he now has Bizarro's body. Bizarro's body, for some reason, still had his super suit on. I do not understand. I guess they were just keeping it locked up somewhere. I don't know. It kind of
probably next to, it's in the Daystrom Institute. It's probably next to Captain James Kirk and Picard's body. So it's just probably right there. No big deal. It's fine.
Yeah, so that definitely rubbed me the wrong way. Bizarro deserved a proper burial.
Well, why? Jean-Luc Picard doesn't.
He does too.
They don't think so.
Well, I think so. So that rubbed me the wrong way.
That was a weird ending, because that's how it ended, was you saw Bizarro's body in Mannheim. The assumption is they're going to somehow resurrect him. I don't know if I like where that's going.
I don't like where that's going. Anyway, when Clark gets home from the DOD, Lois has decided that she's not going to go to the dance. She has to admit that she's just not feeling up to it. And she tells Clark to never stop giving his opinion, especially when he disagrees with her. There's a nice moment when the kids get back from the dance. Everybody's dancing so that Lois can try to recapture what she missed by not attending the dance. Jordan gets his grandfather, the general, all set up with a dating app. That was amusing. I'll be interested to see if they actually have the general going out on dates. I'm probably one of the few people who want to actually see that. But I do. I want to see the general trying to get a personal life. I'd like to see him being happy, because he says apparently he hasn't dated since his wife walked out on him 30 years earlier. The Bizarro reveal was the very end of the episode, but before that, we see Jonathan and Candice getting into Jonathan's truck to head out to Topeka. Like I said, there's no way in hell, if that was my son, that I would let him drive 4 hours each way as a 16-year-old newly licensed driver to drop his girlfriend off at her aunt's. Just no. Overall, this episode was not a bad episode. However, I would say that because they had so many storylines going on in this episode, it was hard to just get into a rhythm of viewing. Once you started getting into a scene, it abruptly cut off and went to somebody else's storyline. It makes it very disjointed when you're trying to watch that way.
Watching television most of our lives, we were used to television having an A plot and a B plot, occasionally a C plot, in a television episode. This is the second episode in a row, because this complaint for this episode I have is the same as last week's. It's not like the stories they're doing are bad. There's too many of them in this episode. There's too many stories. You're not able to enjoy and immerse yourself into any of the stories themselves because you keep jumping around between, there are like 5 stories here maybe.
Even in soap operas, you may have a giant cast of characters, but you don't see every character in every episode because it's too many storylines to try to cram into a 1 hour, or these days more likely a 38 to 40 minute episode because of the commercials. I mean, that's all the time you get. When you try to cram in there, let's see, there was Lois's storyline, which was, and I guess Clark kind of had his own storyline in this episode too.
Well, Lois had 2 storylines. Her cancer, 3 of them. Her cancer treatment, she wanted to go to the dance, and she wanted to investigate Mannheim.
But at least that was all Lois.
Yeah, but it was 3 different types of things she was doing.
True. But then we also had the General and Natalie. We had, I guess General and Natalie need to be 2, because then she has Mateo. Jordan really didn't have much of his own anything. We have Jonathan and Candice. We've got Kyle and Chrissy. We've got Lana. We've got Sarah.
Jonathan and Kyle. The fire department set up.
Yeah. So, we're getting to almost double digits there. I'd say we've probably got 9 distinctly separate character storylines in this episode. And that is just too many. If they were all in like an A story, B story setup with each other, that would have been one thing. But they were all, for the most part, leading separate lives. Fortunately, you had Sarah and Lana. Their stuff was mostly overlapping. Chrissy and Lana, that was overlapping. Kyle and Chrissy overlapping. Lois and Clark overlapping. But there are so many different characters that even with all of that overlapping, it was too many storylines.
When Clark turned into Superman, put his costume on, and was battling Deadline, I made the joke, oh, look, we're going to have a superhero scene in a superhero story. To give credit, at least most of this happened in Smallville, and you and I have both talked that we were worried early in the season they were going to try to migrate this to be some sort of Metropolis-based show, and they haven't done that so far. I'm glad that didn't happen. This was mostly Smallville-based. I'm saying this next thing because if anybody's following this channel, you must know that we also review Secret Hideout Star Trek. This Picard series we're reviewing right now is full of nonsensical, ridiculous storylines. Just nonsensical. Just completely garbage is what I've been using because there's no way to defend this. The storylines in here, except for that USB radio drive, whatever that was in the vault, that was the only thing that I could say to me didn't make sense. Whereas the Picard series, that's all they do. Every single thing they do in Picard is like that USB drive scene I talked about in the vault. The fact that this show only had one thing where I'm like, I don't understand what they're doing. This show, even with all the storylines smooshed together, which I don't really care for, it's still better than Picard. It makes sense. The storylines make logical sense.
Even the characters' behavior in this show makes logical sense. As I said, with the exception of Candice's dad. That was the only one that I felt was being caricatured instead of just being a character. Whereas with Picard, obviously, cause and effect really isn't a thing. Everybody acts like an over-emotional drunk teenager. This show, at least, cause and effect seems to move in a realistic way. Considering that this is a show with people with superpowers, and Star Trek Picard is supposed to be science fiction, not science fantasy. That really tells you something about the quality of the writing over on Picard versus what we're getting here with Superman and Lois.
Star Trek used to have, if they were fighting another ship, we'll go back with Picard, like the actual character Picard. He and his team would use his intelligence in the Next Generation show to try to figure out how to defeat somebody when they were in some sort of battle or even just some sort of problem they had to figure out. I know it was simplistic, but when Superman was fighting Deadline and he kept trying to punch him and he was getting really confused, he was trying heat vision, he was trying his breath, nothing was working. And when he finally figured out that this guy, in order to stab him with the kryptonite knife, had to phase into reality, and that was his moment to actually do something and grab a hold of that guy. That showed intelligence. It showed problem solving. When he finally figured it out, I did like, aha, and I appreciated that as a viewer, I was able to follow along. How did he defeat that guy? He figured out that that guy had a weak point when it's kind of like in Star Trek, like when a cloaked ship had to fire, they would have to be revealed. While they were, that was their weak point. When they were firing, they'd have to like uncloak to fire, at least in the old TOS Romulan days. This was something similar where Superman was kind of getting his butt kicked until he figured out the weak point of this ability that this guy had. It's a superhero show, but I at least appreciated it. When he figured it out, I nodded along with him and said, yeah, how was he stabbing you if he's outside of reality? That he had to phase in. And I appreciated there was some logic there. How can a superhero show have better logic, better grounding in reality than a Star Trek show?
Better writing. That's what this all comes down to. Even though I'm not in love with everything they've done this season, it's still better writing than we see on a lot of shows.
The negative I would have, and this is just me, not only there are too many storylines, but there's not enough superhero moments for me. I enjoyed the first couple of seasons of this, yes, for the family moments, but I said this almost every video this season. I call it the pro wrestling fighting, and I did get that this week, so I appreciated that. One of the things I want to watch in a superhero show is them actually being superheroes. And I got a little bit of that, but this whole dance that's going on with the kids, after a while I was kind of rolling my eyes because there was too much going on. The Lois and the cancer treatment, I actually appreciated that scene when she was waiting in the waiting room, and then they were taking her blood. It was at the very beginning of the episode. Anybody who's been to a lab work or a hospital, they actually did that fairly realistically, where it's kind of lonely and scary when they're doing that. And I thought they did that pretty well. And when Clark was talking to those two women as they were getting cancer treatment. And the one woman, as she was getting chemo, she was kind of falling asleep because she's been on this for a while, and her body was just having trouble dealing with this. And Clark asked, is she going to be okay? And the other lady said, yeah, that's just dealing with the chemo. I really enjoyed that scene. I mean, it was a bit sad to watch that, but I enjoyed that scene for what they were portraying and how realistic I think they were portraying a hospital visit like that. And then the high school stuff, to me, there was too much. I just wish they would, the Lois and Superman or Lois and Clark cancer stuff, I get that that's a theme this season. I guess you have to cover that. As I said, I enjoyed the drama of that this week. And occasionally doing a little high school stuff, like I'm fine with that, but not at the expense of Superman being a superhero. If I have a complaint about this show this season that still is trying to be optimistic, I just wish they would pace things differently. Pick 3, maybe 4 at the most, and even 4 is pushing it, plot lines you want to push in an episode, and explore those in the episode. Even with these 9 different storylines, this was still a better episode than any of the Star Trek Picard episodes this season. Like, by far.
I still feel like they're struggling to figure out what to do with the kids this season. I was glad to see that maybe Jonathan is finally going to get an arc with volunteering with the fire department. But overall, these kids, you never know what you're going to get in an episode because they have no clear story arc this season, at least not so far. This was 5 episodes in, so if they're going to do it, they better get one.
Where was John Henry? I assume he was getting his defenses ready for his showdown with Mannheim, but then kind of Natalie was out on her own. You would have thought he would have been attached to her. I guess the general was there, so one could argue John Henry said, well, I'm getting my defenses ready. General Lane, can you keep an eye on my daughter? And that's probably why he was not happy with the Mateo thing. And as I said, that scene where Sam Lane had his face pushed up against the window as Mateo was talking, like, that was funny. I'll admit, it's hard to explain, but it was funny because then Mateo was like, that guy's scared me. He just saw his face pushed up against the window. But I actually enjoyed a lot of this episode. I wish there weren't as many storylines crammed in here, but what they did have, I enjoyed. I just wish there wasn't as much story pressed in here, or have longer seasons. If you have more to tell, instead of a 10 or a 12 episode season, why don't you go old school and go back to a 20 episode season like they did back, when I watched television when I was a younger man?
Oh, wouldn't that be something? 22 to 26 episodes? Oh, baby.
Well, then you have time to explore things like this. The complaint people make now is, I try to watch those older series with the longer seasons, and there's a lot of filler episodes. Fair enough if you're talking any sort of arc, but you know what happens in those filler episodes? You learn about characters in those episodes. So you can have an episode where you're exploring Natalie and her want to date this Mateo guy. You can have a filler episode doing that.
And you get to live in that little world for, 45 minutes or whatever, that otherwise, what would you be doing with your time? I know we're supposed to go outside and go for a jog or go volunteer at some, I don't know where, but come on. This is at 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. It would be so much better, in my opinion, if we had more new episodes of shows instead of whatever the hell they're going to show after this season is over. Which brings me to a point that I need to make sure that I mention here. We're not getting a new episode of Superman and Lois next week. It's not going to air until April 25th. Obviously, we won't be able to make a video next week with the next episode because there isn't going to be one yet. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that.
The thing, too, is as we're watching this show and we're watching the commercials, they're advertising other shows on the CW. 2 in particular. The Gotham Knights series, that new one, which looks horrible. We watched the first 10 minutes of episode 1. It looks horrible. If somebody is watching that and they have anything positive to say, do leave it in the comments, but I have no want to watch Gotham Knights at all. And then they have an advertisement for The Flash, because that's also not going to be back till April 25th. And the ad they had was like, Arrow's coming back, and I don't know, I look at those commercials for Gotham Knight and The Flash, and it reminds me of why I don't want to watch CW superhero shows. And yet you still have this show, which, faults and all, still is better than those two things I just mentioned.
You must have blocked out that ad for Riverdale.
Oh, you're right. That looked like total crap, too.
That looked like some pretty interesting softcore pornography is what that looked like. I was really taken aback. I am shocked that they would make an ad like that. Wow.
I think it's a disservice for Superman and Lois, this series, to be on the same network that has crap that I just mentioned. That Flash, Riverdale, yeah, because I forgot about that, and Gotham Knights. It's like, one of these things is nowhere near what these other ones are. I really wish that, I'm hoping, if this series continues beyond this season, and it's iffy if it will, it has to get off this network. I understand new ownership and all, but can they just move this to a streaming-only series? Like HBO Max can just make it just for their streaming service like The Last of Us. And maybe they can calm down on this kiddie stuff and actually finish off the series in a really strong way. Because, yeah, I forgot the Riverdale commercial, and that was horrible. I can understand people who have tried the CW stuff, and when they hear us talking positively about this one series, they're like, okay, whatever, but I'm not trying that because I've watched the crap and it's not good as far as the other shows. We get that. I don't know how this show is on the CW. I'll leave it at that.
Because it's a Superman show. But, yeah, I agree with you. One of these things is not like the others. I'm glad that Flash is ending. I'm not sure if this is the last season of Riverdale or not, but I'm surprised with that Gotham Knights show, just how bad that seemed. We made it through the first 10 minutes, and it was just unwatchable beyond that for us. I can't understand. It must have gotten better. It has to have gotten better. But at the very beginning of that show, again, it was just more oversexed teenagers. I don't want to watch that crap. My God. And that's really what you get from a lot of these shows. That Riverdale ad was downright pornographic. I don't know what the CW is doing. I'm hoping that the new ownership looks at what they've got as far as what shows they have and make a decision about what kind of network they want to be. Again, what put the CW in the position to be bought in the first place like this? Those crappy, oversexed teenager shows. Stop it with that shit and just start making decent programming.
I agree. There is talks about rebooting Babylon 5. I can't imagine JMS making a series centered around a bunch of oversexed teenagers. I don't know. I mean, it's a reboot, so who knows what he'll do, but I find that very hard to believe, considering he's older than I am. So I would like to think that maybe the CW has potential here to turn this around. Because I don't understand. You and I were talking as we were watching these commercials. And I said, what I'm trying to do is look at these CW superhero shows, and Riverdale being one of them, because I guess it's based on the Archies. Back in the 90s, like when Xena and Hercules were on, those shows were kind of campy. Well, they weren't sort of. They were campy, roll your eyes stuff. But they still made more sense than these CW shows. I would rather watch Xena Warrior Princess again than watching any of the CW stuff. I try to say for young people, it's just mindless stuff they want to watch people their age doing things. But at some point, because I know in the 90s, Baywatch was on, and I wouldn't watch that. Those are people closer to my age, but it was stupid. So I didn't watch Baywatch. I would rather watch Xena than Baywatch. So I don't understand, even if that's the reason why kids watch these CW shows, it's a Hercules Xena type show. Can't you do better than that? And maybe the answer is no. I mean, when I look what's on TV, maybe this really is the best you're going to get are the Arrowverse shows or Riverdale. But I would argue they're not good. I feel bad for young kids. By kids, I mean teenagers and college kids, aged. Because I don't know what they're watching between classes in college now. I don't know what they're watching. If they're watching this stuff, I don't know what this is doing for any sort of outlet. You know, you want an escape from reality. You've got stress of classes and growing up. When I watched TV when I was younger, I would disappear into these TV shows as an escape from reality. It made it nice with Star Trek because Star Trek mostly made sense back then. The TOS and TNG, and it got a little bit more iffy when you got into Voyager and then into Enterprise, but there was structure in the TOS and TNG era where stuff made sense, that world made sense, and that was a nice place to disappear. I don't know how they can disappear into these CW shows because they don't make sense. Superman and Lois makes mostly sense, but it is an anomaly to the rest of these shows.
Yeah.
And Picard is the same thing. I don't know how people watch Picard. It's not an escape from reality. It is a dystopia. If life is depressing enough as it is, when you're watching the news, you're hearing about big old factory fires polluting the air, trains crashing, chemicals going into your water, and then you stick on Picard. You see more of that. It's like you're watching a continuation of the news. How is that an escape from reality? It's not for me. I don't want to be reminded of how crappy the world is we live in. But that's what television is now, is just a reflection of the crappy world we live in now. And that's why, with all its faults, Superman and Lois is still that family, that ending scene where Lois was still recovering from that session she had, and they were recreating the dance for her at the house. That it showed a healthy, loving family, which was always been the core of this show. And at the very least, we still get that with this show. And as that's such a rare thing right now when you look at all the television that's out there. That's why we defend this show, even when it has some moments of roll your eyes, is it still has things that other television shows of this era aren't giving you anything of. A strong family, a healthy family. They're not doing that anymore on television now. So this is unique to me. I think this deserves at least to be pointed out, even if it has 20 different storylines going on at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Healthy love. That's what this show has. Mature people trying to work out their problems. And like you said, that is so rare these days. And that's why we keep watching, even when they do have too many storylines that make the episode feel like it's a little bit disjointed. I wish it was better. I don't want this to take away from what I've said about this show, but I really wish that we had better than this.
Yeah, I agree. This is a low bar, but I'm at least giving credit for what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's, you've got this strong family. You've got storylines going on that make sense. Wouldn't it be nice to have a show with all this, but actually was telling tight stories? Maybe we're just greedy. Just accept this for what it is. It's like, great, but maybe we want better than this. Go better than this.
I've seen better. I know we can do better. So why aren't they giving us better? That's the real question.
Not just better for this series, just like better on television.
Yeah. And in films. I don't understand why everything is so crap now. Well, I guess that's why we have this channel, because I'm sick of the crap and I'm not just going to sit there and take it anymore. I'm going to call it out.
Iffy morals. After watching Picard and Cowardly Starfleet and iffy morality, even with 20 storylines, seeing Superman and Lois and they have a sense of right and wrong, I'll take that every single time over Star Trek Picard. Every single time.
Yep. Well, what did you guys think of this episode? Did you see the same stuff that we did? Was there anything that you wanted to bring up and talk about? Leave it in the comments below.
Take care.